On May 15, 2026, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, executed one of the most audacious maritime operations of this entire conflict. They seized a floating armory, a vessel literally packed with weapons, and dragged it straight into Iranian territorial waters. This did not happen in the Strait of Hormuz. This did not happen near Iranian waters. This happened 38 miles off the coast of the United Arab Emirates, deep in the heart of U.S. allied Gulf territory. They boarded it, took complete control, and left without firing a single shot. No resistance, no security team, no response. Just a ship full of weapons, gone. And the moment you understand the timing of this seizure, who was meeting where, what agreements were being signed, and whose fingerprints appear on this operation, you will understand that what happened this week is not just another headline. It is a signal, a deliberate, calculated, and deeply provocative signal that the rules of this conflict have changed. Today we are going to break down the complete picture. First, exactly what happened in the last 24 hours and why it matters more than any single event in this war so far. Second, what Iran is publicly declaring right now, and their rhetoric at this moment, is the most aggressive language we have heard since this conflict began on February 28th. Third, what the mainstream media is largely ignoring, what the United States military has already done, what assets are positioned in the region right now, and what is about to happen to Iran's so-called mosquito fleet. And finally, the full strategic analysis. Who benefits, what Iran actually wants, and where this conflict goes from here. Let's build the full picture. Segment 2, the full story. What actually happened. Estimated on screen time, 5 minutes. To understand the full weight of this week's events, you need to understand the broader context of this war and how dramatically the situation has escalated since it began. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated strike campaign consisting of nearly 900 strikes in just 12 hours. These strikes targeted Iran's missile systems, air defense networks, military infrastructure, and senior government leadership simultaneously. The opening wave killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and dozens of other senior Iranian officials in one of the most precisely coordinated military operations in modern history. Iran's response was immediate and significant. Hundreds of ballistic missiles and thousands of drones were launched at Israel, at U.S. military bases across the Middle East, and at U.S. allied Gulf Arab states. Simultaneously, and critically, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which approximately 1/5 of the world's entire oil supply flows every single day. That closure has now been in effect for over 2 months. The economic consequences are severe, and they are accelerating in ways that are now directly affecting everyday Americans. Oil prices have risen nearly $20 per barrel compared to pre-war levels. Average gasoline prices in the United States have climbed to $4.52 per gallon. American households are absorbing an estimated additional $284 each in fuel costs since the war began, according to research from Brown University. The total economic hit to American consumers from spiking gas and diesel prices alone has reached $37 billion. The U.S. military's direct operational costs have now reached $29 billion. And one Harvard public policy expert projects the final bill for this conflict will exceed $1 trillion when all costs are accounted for. This is the economic backdrop against which Iran just seized a floating armory. Now let's talk about what the Hui Chan actually was, because this detail is critical and it is being significantly underreported. The vessel was a Honduras-flagged, Chinese-operated ship anchored approximately 38 miles northeast of Fujairah, the UAE's primary oil export terminal and one of the most strategically significant ports in the entire Persian Gulf region. It was not carrying oil. It was not a cargo ship. It was not transporting passengers. It was a floating armory, a vessel operated by a private maritime security firm and specifically stocked with firearms, ammunition, and defensive equipment that commercial ships use to arm themselves against piracy while transiting high-risk waters in the region. Commercial shipping companies hire these services legally because transiting the Persian Gulf without weapons protection has become genuinely dangerous. The profound irony of what happened should not be lost on anyone paying attention. A ship specifically designed, equipped, and positioned to defend commercial vessels against pirates was itself pirated, and not a single person stopped it. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre officially confirmed the seizure. Additionally, a second vessel operating near Oman was also attacked during the same time frame and reportedly sank. Within a matter of hours, the IRGC had executed 2 separate maritime incidents, and one of them handed Iranian forces an entire weapons cache of unknown but potentially significant contents. Now let us address the most critical element of this story, the dimension that nobody in the mainstream press wants to examine too directly. This vessel was Chinese-operated, and the timing of this seizure could not have been more strategically provocative. President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping had literally just concluded their high-level summit in Beijing. Both leaders had publicly agreed, on the record, before the entire world, that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open to ensure the free flow of global energy, and that Iran must never be permitted to acquire a nuclear weapon. President Trump personally told Fox News that President Xi had given him a direct assurance that China would not supply military equipment to Iran. The president called that assurance a, quote, big statement. And then, almost immediately after that summit concluded and those agreements were announced, a Chinese-operated vessel, conveniently loaded with weapons, was found sitting unguarded in the Persian Gulf, where it was quietly and efficiently seized by Iranian forces. No security personnel, no alarm raised, no resistance of any kind. Officially, China had no involvement. The weapons were a surprise. Beijing is just as shocked as everyone else. That explanation requires an extraordinary suspension of analytical judgment. What we are far more likely looking at is a carefully constructed case of plausible deniability, something China has refined into a strategic art form over many decades. China did not hand Iran weapons directly. China simply ensured that a ship it operated, stocked with weapons, was positioned precisely where Iranian forces could access it, at precisely the moment when global attention was fixed on a summit designed to project US-China alignment. The ship was not handed over, it was just left there, available, unguarded, waiting. Whether that constitutes complicity is a matter of legal interpretation. Whether it constitutes a deliberate strategic calculation designed to maintain plausible deniability while materially assisting Iran, that is a matter of basic common sense. Segment 3. Iran's public rhetoric. Estimated on-screen time, 5 minutes. Sun Tzu wrote, "Know your enemy and know yourself, and you need not fear the result of 100 battles." So let us actually know this enemy. Not the version they want the world to see in their propaganda, but the real strategic picture behind the rhetoric. Because what Iran is saying publicly right now is unprecedented in its aggression, and understanding it is essential to understanding where this conflict is headed. Iran's parliament speaker and chief nuclear negotiator Mohammad Bakir Kalibaf posted on social media this week that Iran's armed forces are fully prepared to deliver what he described as a lesson-giving response to any aggression. That is standard posturing. Every military power issues statements like that. But what followed was far more significant and far more revealing. Senior Iranian officials went well beyond standard military bravado. They began openly referring to the Strait of Hormuz as Iran's nuclear weapon. Let that language absorb for a moment. This is not a metaphor. This is not rhetorical flourish. This is a declared strategic doctrine, openly communicated to the world. Iran is formally and publicly stating that its ability to control, disrupt, and close the Strait of Hormuz is the functional equivalent of a nuclear deterrent, a weapon of mass economic destruction capable of holding the entire global energy supply hostage. Think about the implications of that doctrine for a moment. If Iran genuinely views the strait as its nuclear weapon, its ultimate deterrent, then it has no incentive to genuinely negotiate away control of the strait, any more than a nuclear power would genuinely negotiate away its nuclear arsenal. Every negotiation, every counterproposal, every ceasefire offer must be understood through that lens. Iran is also formally asserting what it describes as sovereignty over the strait, and claiming a legal right to seize oil tankers with connections to the United States. This is not a negotiating position designed to extract concessions. This is a declaration of economic warfare against the international order, dressed up in the language of territorial rights. Meanwhile, the ceasefire that was brokered on April 8th by Pakistan continues to collapse in slow motion. It is worth noting, with significant concern, that Pakistan, which facilitated this ceasefire, is also reportedly hosting Iranian surveillance aircraft on Pakistani soil, according to anonymous U.S. officials who revealed the information to CBS News. Pakistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has denied these claims, but the disclosure raises serious questions about the integrity of Pakistan's role as a neutral mediator. The Trump administration called the ceasefire on massive life support earlier this week. President Trump publicly described Iran's latest counterproposal, relayed through Pakistani mediators, as totally unacceptable and stupid. The Iranian counterproposal, when examined in detail, tells you everything you need to know about Iran's actual intentions. It demanded recognition of Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. It demanded war reparations. It demanded the release of frozen Iranian assets. It demanded the lifting of all sanctions. It demanded an end to all fighting on all fronts, including Lebanon. And in what should be understood as the most revealing detail of all, the proposal contained absolutely no mention of Iran's nuclear program. None. Secretary of State Marco Rubio responded with unusual directness. He stated that the United States will never support an Iranian tolling system in the Strait and does not recognize any Iranian claim to mine international waters. And then he said something that carried considerable strategic weight beyond its surface meaning. We are not asking for China's help. We do not need it. That is a calibrated message to Beijing, acknowledging the public alignment at the summit, while simultaneously communicating that the United States is not sharing decision-making authority or strategic leverage with China. President Trump has made his own position explicit. He told PBS News that any genuine deal would require Iran to ship its enriched uranium stockpile to the United States and commit to not operating its underground nuclear facilities. Iran currently possesses approximately 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, dangerously close to the 90% threshold required for weapons-grade material. The president has stated unambiguously that preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon is the most important thing, by far, in this entire negotiation. Everything else is secondary to that red line. Iran's strategic playbook is now completely visible, and it should be taken with complete seriousness. The goal is not a genuine, durable peace agreement. The goal is to stall long enough to extract maximum concessions, maintain leverage over the strait, protect the nuclear program, rebuild economic strength, and ultimately pressure the United States into withdrawing from the region. Every unworkable counteroffer, every violated ceasefire, every escalatory move on the ground while simultaneously claiming to want peace. It is all part of the same calculated long-term game. Iran is betting that patience and economic pain will accomplish what military force cannot. Segment 4. The U.S. military response. Estimated on-screen time, 6 minutes. Here is what the mainstream media is not covering adequately, and it is arguably the most consequential part of this entire story. Admiral Brad Cooper, the CENTCOM commander, recently testified before the United States Congress under oath. In that testimony, he laid out with considerable precision what the U.S. military has already done against Iran's naval threat, and what it is fully positioned and prepared to do going forward. The picture he described is one of layered, redundant, and specifically designed military capability that the IRGC's Mosquito fleet simply does not have an answer to. But first, to understand the response, you need to understand the threat clearly and honestly. Iran's Mosquito Fleet, the network of fast attack craft that forms the backbone of the IRGC Navy's asymmetric strategy, is estimated to number in the hundreds of individual vessels, with some assessments placing the total as high as 1,000 craft. These boats are small, fast, and highly maneuverable. They are armed with 12.7mm heavy machine guns. The larger variants are capable of carrying and deploying anti-ship cruise missiles. They operate by swarming larger vessels in coordinated waves, attacking from multiple directions simultaneously and disappearing back toward the Iranian coastline before a conventional naval response can organize and respond. This is asymmetric warfare in its most effective form. Iran cannot compete with the United States Navy in a conventional engagement. The disparity in technology, training, and firepower is simply too large. So it does not try. Instead, it uses numbers, speed, geography, and unpredictability to create persistent harassment, strategic disruption, and the kind of low-grade but constant pressure that over time can erode the will of the international community to maintain a sustained military posture. Low technology, deployed intelligently and in overwhelming volume, can be extraordinarily effective. History has demonstrated this repeatedly, but the United States military has spent years studying this specific threat, and it has developed a highly specific, proven, and lethal answer to it. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, now being referred to in military circles and defense commentary as the Boat Buster, is currently positioned in the region in significant numbers, and it is ideally suited for precisely this kind of threat environment. The A-10 was originally designed and built as a tank destroyer, a close air support platform specifically engineered to survive in low-altitude, high-threat environments and deliver devastating firepower against hardened armored ground targets. But against Iran's fast attack fleet operating in the relatively open waters of the Persian Gulf, the A-10 has found an entirely new and equally devastating application. The aircraft's primary weapon system is the GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon, a 30mm gun that fires armor-piercing and high-explosive incendiary rounds at a rate and accuracy that small, fast-moving surface vessels cannot survive under sustained engagement. Against an IRGC fast attack boat doing 40 knots across open water, that weapon system represents overwhelming and decisive force. The A-10 can stay on target, absorb battle damage, and continue delivering fire in ways that other more sophisticated aircraft cannot. There are currently dozens of A-10 aircraft positioned in the region, ready to deploy at short notice. The A-10 embodies a clear and important military philosophy that is directly applicable to this conflict. When your adversary adopts a low-technology strategy, the answer is not always a fifth-generation stealth fighter costing hundreds of millions of dollars. Sometimes the right answer is a platform specifically designed and optimized to destroy low-technology threats reliably, economically, and continuously. The A-10 is exactly that platform for exactly this mission. But the A-10 is not operating alone. The AC-130J Ghost Rider gunship represents another critical and often under-discussed layer of U.S. capability in this theater. The AC-130J is not a fighter aircraft. It is a heavily armed fixed-wing gunship specifically designed to orbit a target area and deliver sustained, precision fire support against ground and surface targets. Its weapons package includes a 105mm howitzer, a weapon system typically found in ground artillery units, now mounted on an aircraft and delivering that level of destructive force with precision targeting against small surface vessels in real time. Against Iran's fast attack boats, an AC-130J orbiting overhead represents a threat the IRGC simply has no counter to. The disparity in firepower, range, and survivability is absolute. Additionally, the U.S. Army's AH-64 Apache attack helicopter is present in theater. The Apache is one of the most combat-proven attack platforms in the world, highly maneuverable in the confined geography of the Persian Gulf, heavily armed with a combination of rockets, missiles, and a 30mm chain gun, and with a documented track record against small surface targets in previous combat engagements across multiple theaters of operation over the past 3 decades. Combined with the substantial naval assets already positioned throughout the region, including carrier strike groups, guided missile destroyers, and submarine forces that have already demonstrated their willingness to engage Iranian vessels, the United States has built a layered, redundant, and specifically tailored military capability designed to neutralize Iran's asymmetric naval strategy comprehensively and decisively. The United States has already demonstrated this willingness with lethal results earlier in this conflict. A U.S. submarine, the USS Charlotte, sank an Iranian Navy frigate in the Indian Ocean in one of the most significant naval combat engagements since the Falklands War 4 decades ago. U.S. forces have fired on Iranian-flagged oil tankers attempting to circumvent the U.S. naval blockade on Iranian vessels and ports. The Trump administration has paused its operation to guide stranded commercial ships through the strait, citing progress in negotiations, but the military assets remain in position and ready. The assets are real. The doctrine is established. The readiness is demonstrably genuine. The question is not whether the United States has the capability to dismantle Iran's Mosquito fleet. It unquestionably does. The question is the timing and the political decision to use that capability at the scale and speed required to fundamentally change Iran's strategic calculation. Segment 5. Strategic Analysis. Estimated on-screen time, 4 minutes. Let us now step back from the individual events and apply genuine strategic analysis to the complete picture, because each of these developments needs to be understood not in isolation, but as part of a larger and more dangerous strategic pattern. Why did Iran seize that floating armory? The answer becomes clear when you examine Iran's current economic and military condition with honesty. Iran is reportedly losing approximately $500 million per day as a result of ongoing international sanctions, the direct costs of this conflict, and severely disrupted trade relationships. That level of sustained economic hemorrhaging places enormous strain on military stockpiles, particularly the weapons and equipment that Iran relies on to supply and sustain its network of proxy forces operating across Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Small arms, rocket-propelled grenades, shoulder-fired anti-aircraft systems, and potentially naval mines. All of these are materials that could plausibly have been aboard the Huichan. For the IRGC, which depends on proxy warfare as a core and indispensable strategic instrument, resupplying those forces is not optional. It is existential. Without that capability, Iran's regional influence collapses. The broader strategic picture points toward a dangerous convergence of interests that extends beyond just Tehran. China publicly aligned with the United States at the Beijing summit, but a Strait of Hormuz that remains contested, with the United States bogged down in an expensive, politically costly, open-ended standoff, serves specific Chinese long-term strategic objectives in ways that are difficult to ignore. Consider this straightforward strategic logic. If China is planning any future military action regarding Taiwan, it will require uninterrupted and reliable access to Persian Gulf oil imports to sustain that operation economically and logistically. An America whose military attention, financial resources, and political will are heavily consumed by an unresolved conflict in the Persian Gulf represents strategic breathing room and distraction for Beijing's own long-term objectives. Not because China desires chaos for its own sake, but because chaos that exhausts the United States in a different theater creates the strategic space China needs for its primary regional ambitions. That logic does not require China to have orchestrated the armory seizure. It simply explains why China might have had a very clear strategic interest in ensuring that certain assets were available to Iran at a certain moment, while maintaining complete plausible deniability about the outcome. The nuclear dimension adds the final critical layer to this analysis. Iran currently possesses approximately 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. The United States is demanding a moratorium of between 15 and 20 years on enrichment as a fundamental and non-negotiable condition of any agreement. Iran is reportedly pushing for a moratorium of just 5 years. Those positions are not merely far apart, they reflect fundamentally different objectives. A 5-year moratorium is not a genuine commitment to denuclearization. It is a strategy for buying time. 5 years to stabilize the economy, rebuild military capacity, advance technical knowledge, and arrive at a nuclear threshold where the entire strategic calculus permanently changes in Iran's favor. The strategic logic Iran is pursuing is clear and should be respected in its internal coherence, even while it is firmly opposed. Hold the strait, sustain the economic pressure, extract maximum concessions through diplomatic stalling, and protect the nuclear program at all costs. The strait is their ultimate leverage. The Mosquito fleet is their enforcement mechanism. And the floating armory they seized this week is a resupply run for a military that is running low on resources, but has absolutely no intention of standing down. Segment 6. Closing. Estimated on-screen time, 2 minutes. So where does this conflict go from here? The Trump administration has made its position unmistakably clear. The ceasefire framework is barely alive. Patience with Iranian negotiating tactics, which have produced nothing but unworkable counterproposals and continued escalation on the ground, is running out. Senior officials are now openly discussing the resumption of major combat operations as a serious near-term possibility. Iran has responded to every genuine diplomatic opening with escalation. China is executing a precise double game, publicly aligned with the United States at the summit, privately engaged in activities that materially benefit Tehran while maintaining perfect deniability. And the United States military is positioned throughout the region with the specific platforms, doctrine, and readiness to dismantle Iran's Mosquito fleet decisively and comprehensively the moment the order is given. The question is not whether the United States has the capability. It unquestionably does. The question is political will. And based on the increasingly frustrated and direct tone coming from the White House, the National Security Council, and senior military commanders, that will is strengthening rapidly. Iran is gambling that economic pain, international pressure, and American domestic fatigue will force Washington to offer the kind of concessions that allow Iran to declare victory, keep its nuclear program, and maintain leverage over the strait for the long term. The United States is signaling with growing urgency that the answer to that gamble is no. And somewhere in the Persian Gulf right now, there is a ship full of weapons that just changed hands, seized in the shadows, through proxies, with plausible deniability constructed into every step of the operation. That single event tells you more about how this conflict is actually being fought than any diplomatic communique or official statement ever will. Drop your analysis in the comments below. I read every single response, and I make it a point to reply within the first 2 hours after every video posts. Follow me on X and Instagram. All links are in the description. And if you want access to members-only deep dives and extended strategic analysis, the Max Ready Room is where that conversation happens at a deeper level. I will see you in the next video.